Okay, perfect. Thank you, Wilf.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Carmel. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm not a great fan of Zoom, but it's great to talk to you guys in Newfoundland. Yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've been up to over the last, I suppose, 8 years of my working life, and that was down in Georgia. I think I got quite a bit on to say, so I'm going to get right to it. And the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen. And when I do that, and then do something over here. Sorry, I've lost my cursor. There it is. Now, I have a feeling everything is okay there at your end. Is there a thumb up I can get?
Yeah, it looks good to me.
Very good. Okay. Fine. Because I've got all sorts of names over on the side of my screen, so I can't see all of my screen, which is unfortunate. But anyway, I will carry on. Georgia, a little bit of history, some botany, and some horticulture. It's a place I went to in 2010 with some ideas of what Georgia would be like. Just like in 1997, I came to Newfoundland with some ideas. And what really struck me when I got to Newfoundland was the botanical and the horticultural history that I really did not expect. Things like Fairyland, things like the Heritage Garden at Munn, so many stories. And when I got to Georgia, obviously I thought about peanuts and cotton and peaches. Certainly a history of slavery. But what I didn't know was just how rich the botanical and horticultural history was in Georgia, and that's what I think I'll talk about tonight, and give you a quick introduction to Georgia and what has been going on and what is going on there now. So I'm going to try and move along, and there, let's go back. Unfortunately. Oh, good. I can move that over there. Good. Maybe I can make it even smaller. Yes, I can. Great. Okay. All right. So I was in Georgia, and I was in the University of Georgia in a city called Athens, and you can see that pointed to over on the right-hand side, about 18 miles away from Atlanta, which is a little bit west. It's a huge state, but Athens itself is a nice small city of about 100,000, and it is home to the University of Georgia. And the University of Georgia goes way back to 1776. It was the first land grant university in that it was given as a school to learn important trades. And in those days, of course, that was agriculture. Unfortunately, nowadays, University of Georgia is more known for this. The Bulldog football team are currently the best in the USA. And why I say that the city of Athens has got about 100,000 people, the stadium in which the Bulldogs play holds 100,000 people. It is a huge money spinner, but it does rather dominate everything that goes on in Athens. But let's say there is a botanical garden. And I was lucky enough to be director there for the last 7 years of my working life. a great little garden. It similar in a way to Mun in having 80% of it as natural habitat and 20% of it as ornamental gardens. It is the State Botanical Garden of Georgia, given to the state, and so it's free of charge. Lots of beautiful flowers, obviously, whether they be camellias and magnolias, enormous collection of magnolias, cornus, and of course the flowering quince, etc. For tree lovers, most of the garden is natural habitat with about 5 miles of trails through it. And it is in the Piedmont area of Georgia, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's some little anemones. Running along the side, one edge of the garden is the Middle Oconee River, which comes out into the Atlantic near Brunswick. Lots to see, about 300,000 visitors every year. Georgia is quite the spot. It's from north to south. It is about 280 miles, east to west, more like about 220. About 60,000 square miles, which makes it somewhat larger than the island of Newfoundland. But unlike the island of Newfoundland, the population of Georgia is about 10.3 million people, and 6 million of those live in Atlanta. It is an enormous city. Really diverse geologically and botanically. It has about 4,000 plant species. And unfortunately, because of the sheer population and the history of agriculture and horticulture, etc., we can see that there's about 155 listed species as rare, threatened, or endangered. There's 600 of special concern and 330 on the Georgia watch list. And so it's a flora that has some problems, and work is underway. But yeah, I was expecting peanuts and cotton and pigs and chickens and blueberries, and yes, they are still there in abundance. But Georgia has a number of different physiognomic areas. On the left, you can see the Appalachian Mountains, which this picture only shows it going up into the US, but as you know, it finally ends up on the Great Northern Peninsula of Newfoundland. But its beginnings is in the very northwest corner of Georgia. And so the very top, the Cumberland Plateau and the Blue Ridge Mountains are part of the Appalachians. We have ridge and valley down to the Piedmont. The fall line, the yellow there, is actually the old coastline of Georgia, back before any glaciation. And then we go down to a very flat coastal plain and the coast. Temperatures anywhere between -20 up in the north to +40. And I've been in those +40s. It is sticky indeed. Rainfall well in excess of 60 inches, and that is considerably higher than in St. John's. The amazing thing is the rain only happens on about 120 days compared to 180 in St. John's. So when it rains, it is almost frightening how hard it rains. Quite incredible, but something to get used to. Top of the state, the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was there just a few weeks ago, and the fall colors were in taking shape beautifully. It was just gorgeous. So there's the Blue Ridge during the summer and now into the fall. And up in those mountains are mountain bogs. And in those mountain bogs is the southernmost populations of Sarracenia purpurea. So all the way down through the Appalachian Mountains down to Georgia, we find the good old pitcher plant that we know and love so well. So that's the mountain bogs in the Blue Ridge. We come down through the valleys and down in through to the Piedmont, where the great rivers, the Savannah and the Altamaha, are on their way to the coast, the Atlantic coast. When we get past the fall line, we get to the coastal plain, a lot of pine forest, unfortunately not as much as there used to be, but the longleaf pine, Pinus palustris, is there in good numbers, and also, of course, grasslands. In the very south, there's the Okefenokee Swamp. I always used to think that name was a joke until I got there, then I realized it was actual. So down into the swamp, full of alligators, and then we come to the coast, which is an extremely complicated coastline of barrier islands, and then various. Let me show you. Yeah, that shows you how complicated the coastline is. You never really know if you're on, if you're walking along the mainland. It really is very complicated, and that whole area is under threat of course, sea level rise. Lots of erosion goes on there. Jekyll Island has a famous driftwood beach with huge pine trees that have been upended by tides and we think probably climate change, sea level rise. But it really is quite the stunning place. Walking along the coasts. The coast of Georgia, but there are so many islands there. You can see from the North Tybee Island and Little Tybee. I was walking along Tybee Island just a few days ago, all the way down to Cumberland Island in the south, and then we're down into Florida near Jacksonville, and then there's Amelia Island, etc. So it's a very interesting, complicated, and incredibly species diverse and important part of Georgia's flora. Quick bit of history. Georgia is in an interesting position. In olden days, it was had the British to the north in the Carolinas and Virginia, etc. To the south, the Spanish were in Florida, often making little sorties up the coast, and the French were in Louisiana, often making little sorties east. So Georgia was slap bang in the middle. And so in 1732, King George II established the province of Georgia as a buffer between all of those and a protector of the Carolinas. Down there is General James Oglethorpe, and he arrived in Savannah with about 114 colonists on the Anne in 1733. Oglethorpe was a soldier, a parliamentarian, a philanthropist, and a humanitarian. And his goal really was to colonize Georgia and defend it against the Spanish. But he also had the dream of creating a community free of vice, free of drink, and free of slavery. Didn't last. Nevertheless, General James Oglethorpe was in fact a fine fella, made great friends with Chief Tommy Chi, and Oglethorpe's started an agrarian plan of farmers, learned from Native Americans, and produced enough corn in the first year to export about 1,000 bushels to England. There is Oglethorpe on the left, and on the right is Tomochichi's grave site in one of the squares in Savannah. One fellow in Oglethorpe's 42nd Regiment was Noble Jones, a very skilled carpenter, a skilled farmer raised in Herefordshire, in his small village of Wormslow Tump. Tump means a small mound. And his duties were fortifications and guarding against the Spanish, to sustain a food source, to try his hand at various non-food crops, and for that he was granted in 1736 by King George II about 500 acres. There's Jones's Tabby House, and it has been replaced by another house in the meantime. So the Tabby House was built at Wormslow. And Wormslow is an amazing estate. You can see the live oak avenue. It's about 1.5 miles long. And if you look up into the trees, you'll see what we know as Spanish moss. Spanish moss. It's not a moss, as I'm sure you know. It's also not a lichen. It is, in fact, 2 species of tillandsia, or air plants. There's Tillandsia usneoides, excuse me, and the small one in that person's hand and up in the trees is Tillandsia recurvata. Now, not easy to see flowers on that. The bird's nest Tillandsia, you are usually a little bit more successful depending on the time of the year. But here's a picture of the 2 Tillandsias, usneoides with the small green flowers and the purple flowers on recurvata. Jones thought that since the red mulberry was native to Georgia, that maybe we can get busy on growing the white mulberry, bringing in some silkworms and producing an industry in Georgia. It was thought to be a great idea by Britain because of so much silk being imported from Asia. We've talked about this over the centuries of trying to replace exports. And but the Morris alba, the silk worm experiment at Wormslow did not work very well at all. There was way more trouble than it was worth. Cotton, on the other hand, was a success. This is not the cotton they grew. This is the cotton that grows now in Georgia, Gossypium barbadense, sea island cotton. Although it's from Ecuador, it was the first colony to produce cotton, and that started in about 1734. And in fact, the cotton gin was discovered or was invented in 1793. So there is cotton for you. Cotton was a huge concern of Wormslow. They made quite a success of it. And the family, the Noble Jones family, lasted right the way through. Okay, the Tabby House is down, but here is Craig and Diana Barrow at the house now. It's still there, and Craig is a direct descendant of Noble Jones. He's a great friend of the Botanical Garden, and Diana used to be the president of the American Horticultural Society. Quick dash back into the 1630s. This is a chap called John Tradescant. Linnaeus coined Tradescantia for him, and he was a great plant collector in the Virginias and the Carolinas. He would take the plants back, he would take back pieces, he would take back fossils, he would take back anything, animal, vegetable, mineral, you name it. And he took it to the Ark, his house near Lambeth in London. And it was, in fact, a museum of biological curiosities. He made quite a bit of money on that. And he was also a great befriended by the king for all sorts of different bits and pieces. If you are interested in reading about him, this is fiction, but it has a lot of fact in it. But Philippa Gregory's Virgin Earth is well worth a read if you want to learn about the old botanists. Obviously, he was not around in Georgia, but 100 years later, John Bartram sure was. And John Bartram, and then later him and his son, they were incredibly important in discovering and bringing into production, really, plants from all the way through Georgia, northern Florida, and the Carolinas. He was born in Philadelphia, a great friend of Carl Linnaeus, who referred to him as the greatest natural botanist in the world, a friend of Benjamin Franklin, and he co-founded the American Philosophical Society. Very productive, many adventures, but we often think of William Bartram as being even more accomplished because of his ability to illustrate plants, and also his writings were so much better than his father's. But rather like Tradescant, Bartram had a garden out back, and it slowly and surely became a place for the public to go and see and pay to get in. And even now, Bartram's garden is the oldest botanical garden in North America, and is still going to grow. The Bartram Trail went all the way through Georgia, all the way into northern Florida, picking up plants hither, thither, and yon. And those were often sent back to Europe in what were called Bartram boxes. He shared his findings with people like John Fothergill, like Mr. Collingson, and of course with Linnaeus. From Bartram's boxes, going back to Europe, we see things like Kalmia latifolia, the mountain laurel. And of course, that went into breeding programs in Europe well before there were breeding programs in Georgia or the rest of the Southeast. So many Kalmia latifolia varieties have come from that initial collection of Bartram. We know that Tradescant tried to grow Phlox paniculata, did not work back in England, but Bartram's collections sure did. And back in Britain, we got the breeding of so many Phlox paniculatas, all from a Georgia collection done by John Bartram. I love this. This plant is a native and with the true American perspicacity, I have to use that one day, and enterprise has forged its way from magenta obscurity to the most prominent place in the world. Bartram also found and sent back to England Monarda, or the Oswego tea, and that went into breeding programs in Europe. He was responsible for the first description of the Venus flytrap down there, and also Hydrangea quercifolia. But maybe his biggest, I suppose, impact was the collection of the azaleas and rhododendrons in North Georgia. Catawbiense, Calendulaceum maximus minus, and viscosum. Because it was these that went back to Europe and became part of the breeding work to produce the Ghent hybrids, then with Mollis, and then recross for the Knapp Hill, and finally the Exbury group of azaleas that are hardy in places like Munn Botanical Garden. There are a number of those there. It really is an amazing collection that all had its start back in the US, or it wasn't even the US then, was it? Back in the Georgia mountains. And that was the responsibility of Bartram to bring those to the fore. There is a picture of Exbury Gardens in Hampshire with so many of those varieties. Perhaps the most important or famous collection by Bartram and named for his friend Benjamin Franklin is Franklinia, a member of the tea family or the camellia family. It was found in one place in 1765 at Fort Barrington. Hopefully you can see that little green square there. There was one collection only. A little later, in 1782, William Bartram went back and painted the plant and got it really well. The plant you see on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side are actually plants at UBC Botanical Garden. It was collected, seeds were sent to Europe and also to Bartram's garden, and every single plant that is available today are all from that bunch of seeds, because it was never seen again. The last verified sighting by John Lyons was in 1803, and it has been extinct in the wild ever since. But it exists in botanical gardens and collections around North America. It's a most fabulous looking plant. What happened to it? Maybe it was as a relictual population on its way out anyway. Maybe it became cotton fields. Maybe it became peanut fields. Maybe it was felled for pine. Who knows? But that site no longer exists. And that species no longer exists in the wild. We have it through horticulture, which is a nice change instead of having problems from horticultural introductions. Right up to date, I was lucky enough to have as a colleague in horticulture at UGA, Michael Durr, who really wrote the book on woody plants, and a Canadian-born guy called Alan Armitage, who wrote more than the book. He wrote a library on half-hardy annuals and perennials and native plants, etc. Glad to have known them. They were great fun to be with. But and here it is. Alan actually started a trial garden where he would show off all the new varieties and have the public come in and give him their opinion on which ones they like best, and that directed the industry to decide on which ones to grow. Great idea, and slap bang in the middle of campus, where you can go and eat lunch, was this amazing trial garden at UGA. But we're talking about native plants. Well, there's the coastal plain, and you can see the effect of agriculture on there. There's the effect of invasive plants in Georgia. That is kudzu. You see the mimosa tree in the top right, top left is wisteria chinensis. Bottom left is the Bradford pear, and bottom right is privet. Incredible amounts of destruction caused by invasive plants. It really is a lovely place to grow, is Georgia, and so some of these exotics have really gone crazy. I just want to give one nod to the native wisteria of Georgia is Wisteria frutescens. Absolutely stunning little plant, never goes out of control, and worth a look if you don't want to get overrun with wisteria. Another threat: wild hogs, feral pigs, what have you. There they are in a mountain bog. Behind that pig in the middle, you can see the flowers of pitcher plant. And these guys are going to destroy that bog, just looking for roots. So that's a huge concern. And of course, sea level rise. So Georgia has a number of significant challenges in terms of plant conservation through habitat loss, through climate change, through invasive species. It really is, and hence the numbers I showed you right early on in this talk. Hats off to the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance, the GPCA. And I think when I got down there and met up with this bunch, it was gratifying, because for years I'd been a part of the limestone barren species at risk recovery team, and as we all know, it takes a village. We needed all those people with all those skills, whether they be federal, whether they be provincial, whether they be botanical gardens, whether they be all sorts, geneticists, you name it, geographers. Well, Conservation Alliance was similarly set up with 47 members, botanical gardens like ours, like Atlanta Botanical Garden, Bureau of Land Management, Department of Defense, Department of Transport. It was an enormous bunch of people all working alongside each other. It would be easy to blame certain people, certain organizations for the destruction of Georgia's wild populations, but it was better to get them on site and work together. And that's what the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance did. It was headquartered at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia, and we were proud to do that. But without all the other members, we couldn't have done the work that was being done. And of course, money was no object. When a road was going, well, no, when a condo block was going to go in on a bog, we dashed in and saved the pitcher plants and put them in kids' paddling pools, because it worked and it was cheap. Atlanta Botanical Garden with Ron Diederman, amazing skills in growing insectivorous plants, and for both the public to see, but also for reintroduction. As I said, the botanical garden at University of Georgia was right on the edge of the Middle Oconee River. And that Middle Oconee River can easily rise by about 10 or 12 feet during rainstorms and the winter rains. And we have this, the floodplain. And the floodplain is something, there's about a quarter of a mile walk until you actually get to the river. This is how far the floodplain goes. And it's quite a mess. And it's our mess. And we like it because our job within the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance is the conservation of the species that grow in these sorts of habitats, floodplain species. There was down in that floodplain at the State Botanical Garden a dilapidated nursery. It was derelict, it was unsafe, it needed to be pulled down, and there was a new nursery being built when I arrived further up the way. What will we do with this? It was an eyesore, it was dangerous, let's pull it down. But the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance and my staff said, can we have it? Can we have it for our floodplain species cultivation? Through some funds from Mimsy Lanier, we started the Mimsy Lanier Native Plant Study Center. Growing pitcher plants in pots, producing wonderful boxes to grow things in, producing plants for sale. There's the Georgia, lost it, sorry. Symphyotrichum. This is the Georgia aster, and doing very well, although it is a plant that's deeply in peril, but we are growing it successfully in a more of a prairie sort of situation. There's Rhus Michoii. This plant has separate male and female plants, and it was found, it was going downhill fast. It was found that the males, the only males we had were 70 miles away from the female. And so this plant was then brought together, potted up, grown, and we are now getting viable seed and beginning to grow new populations of Rhus Michoii. There's Baptisia arachnifera. It's a yellow legume, and it's really happy if the whole area that it grows in is burnt. Unfortunately, we're doing a really good job of fire suppression, and with fire suppression, the Baptisia arachnifera is beginning to get less and less populous. Only 2 or 3 populations of Echinacea, sorry, wrong spelling, Echinacea levigata exist. It's the smooth coneflower, grows up in the extreme northwestern part of Georgia, and very few of them left. But at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia, we are beginning to successfully grow it in pots. There's the Georgia rockcress, and you can see the sorts of things that that volunteers in the Plant Conservation Alliance get up to, climbing up rock faces and planting seeds of arabis. Finally, the relict trillium on the left-hand side, a beautiful plant in terrible, dire straits because it was being dragged up because of road building. This was, there was a lot being dug up and brought to a place where they would be safer, as was the Trillium Georgiana. As we come, I think, to the end of this, I just want to give a nod to the mountain bog restoration team. They're folks I have worked with. It's a messy job, but the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance is busy doing mountain bog restoration. It's busy doing Piedmont floodplain restoration. It's busy doing Piedmont prairie restoration. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of challenges, but I'm pleased to say that not all of these people are old and ready to retire. There are many young, active, and very knowledgeable botanists and horticulturists working together to make sure some of these native plants of Georgia do not go extinct. And with that, I'll thank you and throw it open to questions.
Well, thank you so much, Wilf. That was fantastic. It was so impressive to see what they're doing down there. If anyone would like to comment, feel free to turn on your video and your audio. And if you have questions or comments for Wilf, we would welcome them now.
Wilf, your show was fabulous. What a beautiful state. The only thing I wanted to ask you is the beginning of the cotton crop and the peanut crop. Did that take a lot of the land, and has it diminished? Is the cotton crop still as prolific now today as it was?
It is not as prolific, but Georgia is still the largest producer of cotton in the USA. But there is a more of a diverse agriculture now. Weirdly enough, we always think of it as the Georgia peaches, and peaches are absolutely not the biggest crop by any means now. In fact, blueberries are taking over. So, you know, things have changed over the years, but it is rather, it's wonderful to drive along and see cotton. It's a nasty plant. If you've ever sort of grabbed hold of a cotton boll with the woody outside still on there, it is sharp indeed. It was heavy labor, unfortunately, for so many slaves back then.
The image you showed of Exbury Garden in Hampshire, you know, that beautiful picture that you had there, and most of the plants were exported. Does that still take place now, exporting of different varieties of plants from Georgia?
No, I think that ever since when we got into the 1900s and everything, there was more of an interest in producing and developing plants for their home industry. And so things did not, you know, let's face it, Bartram didn't have many friends out there apart from the famous botanists and horticulturists of Britain and Europe. And so I think he immediately thought about sharing it with those people more than sharing it around in North America, because quite honestly, there was very few to share it with. But nowadays, with the likes of people like Mike Durr and Alan Armitage, John Rutter, and a number of other people, Mr. Klein back early on in this in the 1900s. There's been a lot more production and development of ornamentals based on Georgia collections.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Will.
I'm kind of amazed to hear you say
silence.
they're amazed to hear you say, Wilf, that they're doing a lot of blueberry crops
Yeah.
in Georgia.
Yep.
That's
Yep, for sure.
surprising.
There's different species, and every plants area you go to, you can come away with a forest of blueberry plants. There's a lot of people growing blueberries. I think actually it's more difficult to grow peaches nowadays. It's very hot. They get a lot of bugs, and blueberries are quite bug free. And so for a lot of home gardeners, they enjoy growing blueberries. And I'd rather, buy peaches at a roadside stand than try and grow them myself.
Wilf?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's Susan Shirk. I'm delighted to see you here.
Susan, good to see you too.
Yeah, I know, it's wonderful. It's been too long, all those years. I've one question that interests me. I've spent a fair amount of time in Uzbekistan, and Stalin's days, they wanted to introduce cotton, and essentially he caused canals to be created which drained the Aral Sea. Because cotton demands a lot of water. Just for a moment, is the cotton area of Georgia near the sea? What do they do about the water situation? Because that would be problematic now, I would think.
Yeah, certainly. Water is a big issue, and it's getting a bigger issue. Sure, there's a lot of rain, but it all happens, in an enormous downpour, and then there's a great runoff. But cotton, you'll see that mostly in middle Georgia and out towards the coast. There is a lot of problems with water sourcing, but there is a good runoff every year from the mountains, and the Savannah River and the Altamaha River are full, and there's a lot of reservoirs. So some of the reservoirs are humongous. And that's used for agriculture as well. So there's been a lot of damming of rivers around Georgia because agriculture has been so big in Georgia for centuries, and so that sort of shall we say preparation for watering goes way back.
My second question is on the rhododendrons. I've driven many years ago along the Blue Ridge Mountains and been struck by the azaleas and the rhododendrons. Is there, when you were there, were there propagating any unusual species or different rhododendrons? Was there any sort of
well, from the native stock, over the last, shall we say, 30, 40 years, there's been a lot of selection from the straight species. Candulaceum has a number of different varieties, as does Catawbiense. So there has been a lot of work, shall we say, in-house or in-state on the native rhododendrons. And so I remember the various plant sales that I was involved in. The first things to sell out were the native rhododendrons and azaleas. And they were mostly selections of the straight species, not hybrids at all. So there's still a lot of, shall we say, investigation and selection going on. But there's literally scores of different rhododendron, Candulaceum, etc. Nowadays compared to back in Bartram's days.
Good.
Wilf, I was interested to note that you made reference to Bartram and Tradescant and some other people that had a connection with Georgia, but we should be familiar, of course, with things like Bartram's Chuckley pear and Tradescant's aster is a species at risk in Newfoundland, found only in one river up in Bay St. George, in the head of Bay St. George. So, you know, these guys were, you know, known outside of Georgia and the horticultural.
For sure, for sure, yeah. Yeah, and if Georgia had its Bartram, as did North Carolina, etc., of course, Fernald was in the early 1900s was flipping up and down Newfoundland quite a bit. So
yes, for sure.
we've been blessed with a lot of very able botanists looking through our areas, and you know, it's a great legacy.
Is the Bartram's Chuckley after the William or the John? Which one of them is it refers to?
It was probably after William. It's interesting. You go online and you put in John Bartram and you get a load of information about William and vice versa. They're almost like stuck together. So it's better to just put in Bartram. But William was well known as a great illustrator and documenter of plants. Benjamin Franklin actually asked John Bartram to do some reports and maybe write about his travels. His writing was so poor, it never really made it into any sort of book form. But William's writing was superb, and so many of the species descriptions are probably based on William's writing more than John's.
Thank you.
Wilf, it was really interesting seeing some of the plants that you're challenged with, you know, some of the species that are taken over and some of the invasive species. And to see that wisteria is actually a problem for you. I thought that was pretty interesting. We struggle to grow it here, of course, and you know, there's a few little microclimates that get away with it. But I always find that pretty interesting, that what is difficult for some of us is incredibly easy and often too easy for some, to the point of where it becomes a problem. And it was really good to see the pitcher plant making its way all the way down there. I wasn't aware of that, and obviously up in the mountains where it's a little bit cooler than down in the more you know, near Atlanta and those areas, and the rhododendrons, of course. And I love that story of the trail of plants, you know, the fact that, you know, some of those started off there and then went to England and then got distributed all throughout, and we see them now in our own gardens. But I do know that in the UK, of course, there's rhododendrons, especially rhododendron ponticum is kind of taken over, and it's a huge problem there, and one of the millions of dollars trying to eradicate that. And I wondered if any rhododendron species have become a problem in that area, because of course the climate is so good for them there in Georgia.
There's really no rhododendron or really member of the Ericaceae that has gone as rife as some of the other plants in Georgia. I think up in North Georgia, of course, we've got mountains, and we've got the soil of, you know, deciduous woodland, but down in the rest of Georgia, you've got that heavy red clay, and rhododendrons are not crazy about that, and so you've got an awful lot of Georgia that is not would not become a problem. Where rhododendrons would not be a problem, but up in the north, we really don't see any problem with any Asian species of rhododendrons at all. I think the biggest problem right the way through the state is privet. We talk about wisteria, and wisteria can actually fell trees. But it seems to me that if there was one plant to get rid of, it would be privet, because it changes it changes the landscape. It changes the chemistry of the soil. It's perfectly happy in almost darkness, in floodplain or dry forests. It really is an awful thing. We did, in fact, bring in, there was a woman, a farmer outside Athens, Georgia, who ran sheep who ate privet.
No, there's a business model for it.
Yeah, and so we actually hired her to bring in her herd of sheep to start eating privet in the forest. They are they're not very specific. They will eat anything, including privet. And if privet is about the only problem you've got, you might be all right. But they'll eat everything. After it was fine. It was rather expensive, but it was a bit of it was great for the visitors. They loved to see it. But later I got word that she was selling meat. She was going to sell some lamb. So I ordered half a lamb.
Did it taste like
pathetic? It was hardly any poundage whatsoever. I was wondering if it would have a taste of privet. It didn't. It didn't really have a taste of anything. It was awful, an awful meal. But she's doing all right. I've heard goats eat privet as well. So,
is that the same privet that we would use here as a hedge? The Ligusticum scothicum, is it? Or I'm trying to think of this.
This is I think this is Chinensis.
Okay.
But, one other thing, got to tell you this. So we're talking about football. We're talking about the Bulldog football team, and they play at the huge stadium. And when the stadium was being prepared for the Olympics a few years ago, they had to dig up the hedge that was around the field. And the field, of course, is made of privet. And they actually had people dig up privet plants, dig up bits of the hedge, in order to I don't know. They were trying to save the privet.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, they were trying to save the privet because what can I tell you? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
They just needed the space for the game, and I guess people thought they were saving a plant that that was
they actually gave people privet plants to take home to care for until the Olympics were over, and then they brought them all back to the stadium and replanted them so they could have the privet hedge once again.
It'd be like us giving people a Japanese knotweed to take home.
Exactly.
Well, that's right, mile a minute. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Crazy.
Well, just one quick question I have for you. The plant conservation group that you work with, are they strongly affiliated with the botanical garden that you worked with?
The botanical garden is the headquarters or the coordinator. We'll call it the coordinator. Jennifer Seska is the coordinator of the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance. but there are 47 members, and they all do their own thing and share knowledge, help out. I need a horticulturist to do this, or is there a tissue culturist that can help me do this? Is there someone in genetics can help me do this? So there's a lot of toing and froing of information, and it really does do well. And Heather Alley, who is used to be my native plant conservation horticulturist, I suppose, would bring up to 100 or 200 plants of a certain endangered species that then would go out to another group for planting on some prairie or in some mountain bog. So there was a lot of coordination and a lot of cooperation. And I thought that was really what made, or still does, make the Georgia Plant Conservation Alliance so successful.
Excellent. Thank you.
Wilf, my question was not a question, it's a comment. In all my years of teaching about bog conservation and the dangers and the threats, I've never brought up pigs before. So that picture kind of blew me away. So are they specifically going to the bog and rooting? And I can't think like what roots are down in a bog, or are they going everywhere and they happen to go through the bog as well?
Well, it's a pretty dense forest up there, but they do like to, especially on a warm, warm day, they like to just like slather themselves in mud and hang around in bogs, and they're just constantly rooting up, and they will destroy an area, so quickly, and then just leave it alone. And the time it takes for that bog to recover, it can take years. And those pigs are in huge numbers. There's actually you can go out there and shoot them. There's a bounty on their heads.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I'm surprised, sort of like moose hunting here. It's something like, does everybody go out and go pig hunting to, bring home their pig?
Yeah, I mean, you can come home with bacon. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, price of meat, Anyway, yeah, I was fascinated by that photo. I've never seen pigs in a bog before, so that's.
Oh yeah, that unfortunately it won't take long before you find evidence of feral pigs, as they call them. Yeah, horrible.
Thank you.
Talking about animals, Wilf, I was wondering if you took that photo of the alligator.
No, the photo I took of an alligator was one that was walking across the fairway of a golf course I was playing. We decided to stop and let it pass. If it had eaten the golf ball, thinking it was an egg, I think we could have laid down another ball without penalty.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I remember. At the botanical garden, we had plenty of snakes. It was the first time I'd ever lived with snakes. I remember in Newfoundland, Labrador, or northern BC, when plant hunting, you always walk with your head up, looking for large animals. In Georgia, you look down because you never know when you're going to step on a snake. There's quite a few perfectly innocuous black snakes and king snakes. They're lovely, but there's also rattlers, and the most unkind snake of the lot is something called a copperhead. And I remember I was in my office on a Sunday afternoon. It was very quiet. I had across from my desk is a small coat closet, and slithering out from under the door of the coat closet was a copperhead snake. Wasn't particularly large, it wasn't particularly old, but apparently they're born in a bad mood, and they will strike even after they've left the egg. They will strike at anything. So I had to follow it down the corridor, put a vase, a square vase down in the corner, and it sort of slithered in there. And then I took it outside and hooked it in the forest. But of course, in Georgia, if people see a snake on the road, they simply aim their car at it, because the only good snake is a dead snake. And that's not what we're around. I had a phone call once in my office from a distraught and irate garden visitor who said there was a snake in the garden. And I said, where are you? She said, oh, I'm in by the medicinal garden. I said, is it a black snake? She says, yes, shiny black snake. I said, oh, that snake lives there. Why'd you let him in? And it's like, well, you know, they don't pay an admission fee, and they just, no. She was very upset that we actually had snakes in the garden. Sorry, cannot do anything about that.
Oh my.
I have one final question. I wanted to ask you about the funding. Is the funding for the botanical garden good, or do you have to fundraise, or is it donations? Do you get big donations? How does that go?
Well, I could give you a very long answer to that. It is touch and go all the time. We do have an endowment. I was talking to the new director, Jenny, just the other day, and the endowment has gone up. It's now at around $11 million. So that produces interest every year. We have a large conservatory. We also have a non-denominational chapel at the garden, and that is used for weddings, and that in itself produces about $250,000 a year in rental fees. And so, yeah, we have a staff of about 30, so that demands quite the budget. But we do make money, except at the gate. We don't make any admission fees, although since I've left, and you'll like this one, Tim, we now have Christmas lights. Now, I was not responsible for the Christmas lights. It's happened since I've been gone, but apparently that has an admission fee, and that spins out quite a few $100,000 a year. So, so it's there is always a need to make money, but philanthropy is big. I did have a board of advisors, not of directors. My board of advisors were all about fundraising. My board of advisors numbered 78 people.
Wow.
So and 4 meetings a year. So that took quite a bit of time, but they themselves were huge supporters of the garden. So yeah, philanthropy in the US is very different from philanthropy here in Canada. You know, I love them dearly down there. It is, but there's an awful lot of handshaking to go on down there. I spent a lot of my time doing that. I had to raise about $5 million for a children's garden when I got down there. So it was there was a lot of, shall we say, handshaking.
I remember when you first moved, I think you must have sent an annual report back, and it included the donors list at the back, and some of the names and the different categories of donors, and you know, the lowest number would have been high for us.
Yes. Yeah. No, it was a whole different scene when I got down there. I had to learn. I had a director of development whose only job was fundraising, and you know, taking me around to shake their hand, talk to this person, you know, have dinner with this person. So I was at their command, but successful. Yeah, it went well.
Thank you. Wilf.
Yeah. Well, I think we could say thank you over and over, because this was really fabulous. Personally, I look forward to watching it on the video, because it's been a little bit busy tonight, but and I can really take it all in. The photos were just gorgeous, And what an adventure living there for 6 years you had. Thank you so much, Wilf.
I really appreciate the invitation, and it's been great
Yeah.
talking to you, great seeing some faces, and I wish you well.
Yeah.
I'm going to get back to my Tuesday afternoon. Right.
Oh, okay. So,
Across the country too for you. Thank
yeah.
you.
Okay,
All
so
right.
we'll say good night to everybody. See
Thank
you.
you, Will.
Thank you. Thanks,
in
Will.
January.
Thanks.
Take good care.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.